Hello there and welcome back to the latest edition of Broncos Beat. We are so thrilled that you can join us tonight as we break down Pro Football Focus's 2020 roster rankings. So here to do that with me, we have PFF's very own George Chahrouri, Cecil Lammey from 104.3 The Fan, and James Palmer from the NFL Network. Guys, last week Pro Football Focus ranked all 32 teams based on their rosters heading into the 2020 season. The Ravens were number 1, the Jags were last, and the Broncos fell just inside the top half at number 14. George, can you shed a little bit of light onto how this list is actually compiled?
Well, it's not the easiest thing to do because positional value matters in the NFL. And so you immediately go to the quarterback and you want to start there and weigh that way more heavily than any other, position group on the roster. But we tried to take a more holistic approach, weigh every position group and facet equally, and then use the PFF grades to kind of say, how strong is this group? What do we know looking back 3-4 years? Because sometimes, there are certain players that have a down year the year before, but we know, Darius Slay is a great example. We know he's a really good corner, so we're going to value him a little bit more highly. And then try and rank every single position group equally and come to it as hard as you can, a differentiator between those teams and rank them out. And so I don't know if it's if there's anything that's perfect, but I thought this did a pretty good job of going from 1 to 32 in a decent order.
Well, the Broncos, they rank number 14, and we're going to get into the biggest strength, weakness, and X factor for the Denver Broncos coming up here in just a little bit. But do you guys feel like number 14 was too high, too low, or a really fair ranking for the Broncos?
Well, I think Alexis, it's pretty fair considering they're one of the teams that everybody nationally even is talking about this offseason, right? And it's because of talent. And talent's kind of the way this list seems to be somewhat put together. And you look at the talent that they added, it does seem to be the fact that they should be one of those teams that's around that number. When I went scrolling through this and clicked it, I was like, I kind of see that. I do. But we'll get into where all the different spots lie and the importance of it. I'm kind of curious for George as well, though, like where does continuity come into play?
Mm-hmm.
Where does coaching come into play with it? Their coaches get more out of different guys. I'm kind of wondering how those aspects kind of play their part in this as well.
Well, it's interesting. I saw 14, and when we had them there, the first thing that came to mind is, the playoff system changed, right? And 14 now, there are 14 teams that make the playoffs. So whereas last year you might have looked at that and go, oh man, that's kind of, outside looking in. This year, you look at 14, you go, man, that's 14. And if I look at the teams ahead of them, this was what really stuck out to me. All of those teams, I think with the exception of the Bills, had a really pretty proven quarterback.
Yep.
And so the Broncos sit there at 14, and we'll probably talk about Drew Lock here in a second, by far the most unproven of every quarterback in that top 14. So to say, hey, you've got a top 14 roster and an unproven quarterback, I think that's a positive way to look at it, because if that quarterback improves, he's got some things to work with.
That 14 was right on the money. And first, I must say that this type of list is fascinating because it takes everything into account. And depth is something that's going to be tested this season, perhaps more so than ever. And when I look at the Denver Broncos, that seems to be about the right spot based on the talent that they added. And then I think of the young quarterback. I also think of the pressure now that this staff becomes under right there in year 2 for Vic Fangio. I mean, it's playoffs or bust for this Broncos team, which I love. That's the Broncos way. That's what we expect from this team, and that's what this list kind of highlights and emphasizes. They are one of the up-and-coming, one of the better teams. They have one of the better overall rosters in the entire league.
The Chiefs were number 4. The Chargers were number 16, meaning 3 of the 4 AFC West teams are in the top half. What does that say about the competition in this division coming up this season?
Well, I'll start off and say, George, I'm going. I'm like, I see 1, I see 2, I see 3. I'm like, when are we getting to the Chiefs, the defending Super Bowl champions that are returning 20 of 22 starters? And then I see them at 4. But you look at everybody at near the top. Those are some great rosters. I do think you look at the Chargers, and it's the only starting quarterback with a lower number than the Broncos have with Drew Lock, right, with Tyrod Taylor. So their quarterback situation is really one of the more fascinating ones to watch. They're going to be an interesting team. I do know there's some more positive about the Raiders than maybe some people think. I've talked to some of their coaches actually recently, and they think Derek Carr is going to have quite the bounce-back year because of Marcus Mariota being there and maybe a chip on his shoulder. I think maybe we could see them play a little better. I think to answer your question, Alexis, it shows you that this division is in a very different spot than it was, say, 2 years ago.
Maybe a change of scenery will help the Raiders too, huh?
Yeah, that new
I
facility.
hope so.
Yeah.
Let's play inside of a Roomba, everybody. That's what that thing looks like to me every time I see it. But it's a fascinating stadium, fascinating division. That's what this is. This is an incredibly tough division. And I think the Chargers, where I felt the Broncos were fine at 14, the Chargers might have been a little low. In my book, the Tyrod Taylor situation, we'll see if he's even starting. Justin Herbert's in there. Do they make a move and add somebody? A Colin Kaepernick. We've talked about that on this show. But the Chargers are incredibly tough. And it will be a knockdown, drag-out fight between the Broncos and the Chargers to figure out who's number 2 in the division behind Kansas City this year.
My big takeaway there was, man, the Chargers blew it. Like, you have a stacked roster, and you go out there and you don't address tackle, and you have probably 2 backup quarterbacks as your quarterbacks. They had an opportunity to go out and get, say, a Cam Newton, Jameis Winston, and then a stud left tackle. Didn't do it. And to me, that was a huge miss on their part.